Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to help our channel grow. Now, let's begin the story. In the quiet, beautiful town of Asheville, North Carolina, where the Appalachian Mountains paint the horizon and life moves slowly, the brutal murder of Judge shocked the community. The sheriff, a respected figure in the town, was found dead in an abandoned hunting cabin miles from his upscale home. No one could have anticipated such a violent end for the man who once brought the law to the community. The 24-year-old daughter of Sheriff Douglas Cates found herself entangled in a web of manipulation, control, and obsession. What began as an affair soon turned into a suffocating obsession, culminating in a shocking murder that left the entire town shocked. As detectives pieced together the case, they uncovered a twisted story of events that blurred the line between victim and perpetrator. What was the real story behind the affair? Who had taken the sheriff's life and why? The truth would reveal itself in a way no one saw coming, and the final twist would leave the community questioning everything they thought they knew. Gavin Blaine had always been a man of authority. At 49 years old, he was a stable figure in the Buncombe County Courthouse, where he presided as a senior judge. Known for his unflinching decisions and stern demeanor, Gavin had earned the respect of both his peers and the community over the years. However, in the solitude of his large, empty home, the recently divorced judge struggled with loneliness, which slowly ate away at his confidence and self-worth. It had been 2 years since his marriage ended. His ex-wife, Kathleen, had left him after growing tired of the long hours and emotional detachment that Gavin's career demanded. Their children, now grown, had moved away, leaving Gavin with little but his work to fill the emptiness. His position, once a source of pride, now felt like a burden, and the life he'd built seemed empty without anyone to share it with. It was at a charity event hosted by the Asheville Art Society that Gavin first noticed her, Meera Cates. Unlike other young women in town, Meera, at 24, exuded a quiet confidence and creative energy that intrigued him. She was the daughter of Sheriff Douglas Cates, a man Gavin had worked closely with on many legal cases. But unlike her father, rooted in law enforcement, Meera's interests lay elsewhere. She worked part-time at a local art gallery, assisting with exhibitions and dreaming of a career in design. Though she respected her father, Meera often felt stifled by his strict expectations and the small-town environment that seemed to close in around her. Gavin and Meera's paths crossed at the charity event where she was volunteering. The conversation began innocently enough, discussing art and the importance of supporting local culture. Beneath the surface, however, there was an undeniable tension. Gavin found himself captivated by her beauty and youth, while Meera was drawn to the aura of power that Gavin exuded. That night marked the beginning of a relationship that would soon become much darker than either of them could have predicted. In the days following their initial meeting, Gavin couldn't stop thinking about Meera. Her image lingered in his mind, an obsession that began to eclipse his focus on work. He found excuses to visit the gallery where she worked, pretending to be interested in art but really seeking any opportunity to see her again. Flattered by the attention from such a powerful man, Meera didn't resist, though she had reservations about their age difference and the fact that Gavin was a colleague of her father. She enjoyed the thrill of being pursued by someone like him, an escape from the mundane life she had always known in Asheville. Their relationship quickly shifted from light conversation to something more personal. Gavin spoke of his loneliness, his failed marriage, and how lost he felt without a companion. Meera listened, offering sympathy, as the nature of their relationship grew more intense. One evening, after a late-night exhibition at the gallery, Gavin suggested they go for a drink at a quiet bar. Meera hesitated, but the excitement of doing something rebellious, something forbidden, proved too enticing. The drink led to another, and by the end of the night the boundary between them had been crossed. Their affair began in secret, hidden places, late-night drives, and rented cabins in the mountains. Gavin, though cautious at first, became increasingly obsessed. He bought her gifts, jewelry, and expensive clothes, trying to keep her close, ensuring she remained tied to him. Meera, meanwhile, enjoyed the benefits of their relationship, but was careful not to become too attached. For her, it was an adventure, a secret thrill she could indulge in before moving on to the next phase of her life. She never intended for it to become anything more. As the months passed, the affair turned darker. Gavin's possessiveness deepened and his emotional volatility grew. He began demanding more of her time and became frustrated when she couldn't meet his expectations. His jealousy flared when he suspected Meera was spending time with other men her age, and he started texting her incessantly, calling her late at night, and even showing up unannounced at her apartment. Meera had begun dating Eli Turner, a local artist she met through her work at the gallery. Their relationship was casual at first, but as Meera's dissatisfaction with Gavin grew, she found herself drawn more to Eli's easygoing nature. She kept their relationship a secret, but it didn't take long before Gavin discovered the truth. One afternoon, Gavin spotted Meera and Eli together at a coffee shop. Furious, he confronted her that night, demanding to know who Eli was and why she had been spending time with him. The confrontation left Meera shaken, and for the first time she began to fear what Gavin might do if he felt truly betrayed. Gavin's possessiveness worsened after that. He left notes on her car, sent dozens of texts a day, and even waited outside her apartment late at night. Meera began to feel trapped, unsure of how to extricate herself from the relationship without inciting Gavin's rage. She considered confiding in her father, but the thought of Sheriff Cates discovering her affair with Gavin terrified her. Sheriff Douglas Cates, known for his keen instincts, began to suspect something was wrong with his daughter. Over the past few months, Meera had become more secretive and distant. One evening, Sheriff noticed Gavin's car outside her apartment, which raised red flags. After investigating Gavin's recent activities, Sheriff began to believe that something was going on between the judge and his daughter. Meera's worst fears came true when, after a confrontation at the gallery, Gavin's obsession reached a breaking point. His jealousy turned violent, and his threats took on a darker tone. Meera realized she needed to escape, but Gavin wouldn't let go. The situation reached its tragic climax when Sheriff Cates was found dead in a remote area, shot execution style. Meera knew who was responsible, and the investigation would soon uncover a tangled web of secrets, betrayal, and violence that no one had expected. After her father's death, Meera carried the weight of guilt for keeping her affair with Gavin a secret. Eventually, she confessed everything to the investigators: her relationship with Gavin, his growing obsession, and the threats he had made after discovering her connection with Eli. The investigators were stunned. The respected judge, Gavin Blaine, was now the prime suspect in the sheriff's murder, but there was still no direct evidence linking him to the crime. They needed more. Detective Aaron, a veteran investigator from the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, was assigned to lead the case. As he dug deeper into the murder, he quickly realized that the affair between Gavin and Meera was key to solving it. However, without concrete evidence tying Gavin to the crime, they couldn't make an arrest. Detective Trent focused on Gavin's financial records. It didn't take long to discover that just days before Sheriff Cates was killed, Gavin had made a large withdrawal from his bank account, a sum large enough to suggest it was meant for something more than personal expenses. Trent began to suspect that Gavin had hired someone to kill the sheriff, eliminating the man who stood in the way of his relationship with Meera. But as the investigation continued, something didn't add up. Gavin had no known connections to criminals or hitmen, and there was no evidence that he had ever been involved in anything illegal. While the money was a clue, it wasn't enough to prove a murder for hire. Meanwhile, Meera lived in constant fear. She knew Gavin was capable of anything and couldn't shake the feeling that he was involved in her father's death. Yet, with no solid proof, all she could do was wait and hope the police would find something before Gavin came after her too. As the days passed, the pressure on Detective Trent to solve the case grew. The community was on edge, and the media had begun to sensationalize the investigation. The affair between a respected judge and the sheriff's daughter, the murder of a law enforcement officer, and the growing suspicion that Gavin Blaine was involved. Despite the circumstantial evidence, there was still no smoking gun. That changed when one of the detectives found surveillance footage from a gas station near the crime scene. The footage showed Gavin's car driving through the area on the night of Sheriff Cates's murder. While it wasn't definitive proof of his involvement, it placed him near the scene at the right time. Armed with this new information, Detective Trent began to put more pressure on Gavin. He questioned him repeatedly, searching for inconsistencies in his story. Initially, Gavin denied any involvement, claiming he had been at home the night the sheriff was killed. But when confronted with the surveillance footage, Gavin's story began to fall apart. The final piece of the puzzle came when Trent reviewed Gavin's phone records. It turned out that Gavin had been in contact with Sheriff Cates shortly before his death. The two had exchanged several text messages, and the last one from the sheriff indicated that he was planning to confront Gavin about his relationship with Meera. Faced with mounting evidence, Gavin's facade began to crumble. He knew his time was running out. As the investigation into Sheriff Cates's murder neared its climax, the weight of suspicion settled firmly on Judge Gavin Blaine. The timeline of events, financial transactions, and mounting circumstantial evidence painted him as a prime suspect. Yet Detective Trent knew they still needed conclusive proof to secure a conviction. The judge's seemingly perfect life had crumbled, but there was still one final shocking truth to uncover. Detective Trent and his team doubled down on every detail of Gavin's life, determined to find the missing piece. Forensic analysis of Gavin's recent large cash withdrawal pointed to a deliberate plan, but so far, the investigation hadn't revealed how the money was used. Then, a seemingly innocuous item, a stray receipt found in the glove compartment of Gavin's car, led to an unexpected breakthrough. It was for a hardware store purchase made 2 days before Sheriff Cates's murder. The items listed included gloves, rope, and a shovel. The discovery of the receipt intensified the case against Gavin, hinting at a premeditated crime. While none of these items directly tied Gavin to the sheriff's death, the context was too suspicious to overlook. Trent surmised that Gavin had purchased the tools intending to stage the murder, or perhaps dispose of evidence afterward. Even as the case against Gavin tightened, Trent knew they needed either a confession or a witness statement to make the case airtight. Detective Trent decided to take a calculated risk by bringing Meera in for questioning again, hoping that her emotions would lead her to reveal something previously hidden. Over the course of their conversation, Trent gently but firmly encouraged Meera to share her innermost thoughts about Gavin. She was visibly shaken, and the strain of the secrets she had been hiding became apparent. Meera admitted that she had known about Gavin's obsession for months, and that in his more desperate moments he had made dark, possessive comments about her father. She confided that Gavin had often said that if her father were out of the way, their relationship could finally be public, and the obstacles keeping them apart would disappear. While Gavin framed these statements as expressions of love, they felt increasingly menacing to Meera. This admission added fuel to the fire. Meera, though not directly implicated, had unknowingly become a catalyst in Gavin's deadly fixation. Trent shared her statement with his team, and they unanimously agreed it was time to confront Gavin directly. Equipped with their findings, Trent secured a warrant to search Gavin's home. The search turned up what they had feared: a handgun registered in Gavin's name, recently cleaned, but with faint traces of gunpowder residue. With the evidence mounting and his motives becoming clearer, it seemed inevitable that Gavin's meticulously concealed plans would soon be exposed. Detective Trent scheduled a formal interrogation with Gavin, planning to reveal the mounting evidence strategically in hopes of prompting a confession. When Gavin was brought into the interrogation room, he maintained an air of detached composure, as if convinced he could still talk his way out of the accusations. Trent began by outlining the findings: the suspicious financial transactions, the hardware store receipt, the timeline, and now the handgun with traces of gunpowder residue. As each detail was presented, a subtle shift in Gavin's demeanor became apparent. His initial confidence faded, replaced by a growing fear. After a long silence, Trent brought up Meera's statement, describing how she had detailed Gavin's controlling behavior, his obsession, and his repeated suggestions that her father's death could clear the way for their relationship. Gavin's face turned ashen at the mention of Meera's name. It was clear that despite everything, he had believed she would remain loyal to him. Realizing he was cornered, Gavin's composure finally crumbled. He stared at the table, his hands shaking. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he began to talk. At first, his words were disjointed, but gradually the story came together. He explained the growing resentment he felt toward Sheriff Cates, who he saw as an obstacle to his happiness with Meera. Gavin described reaching a point where he believed he had no choice. His only option to be with Meera was to eliminate the person standing between them. As he spoke, the darkness of his obsession became clear, a twisted logic in which he viewed Sheriff Cates not as Meera's father, but as a mere impediment to his desires. Gavin confessed to the sheriff to a remote area under the pretense of discussing Meera. He admitted he tried to make the encounter appear amicable at first, hoping the sheriff wouldn't realize the danger until it was too late. But when the moment came, Gavin's nerves betrayed him, and the sheriff immediately sensed something was wrong. The confrontation escalated, and in a fit of desperation, Gavin shot Sheriff Cates. After the confession, the reality of his actions seemed to wash over Gavin in waves. His face turned pale, contorted with a mixture of horror and regret. But as he sat there, it became clear that he wasn't grieving the life he had taken. He was grieving the loss of the future he had envisioned with Meera. The case against Gavin Blaine was airtight. Following his confession, the trial, which took place over the next few months, drew intense media attention. The details of his obsessive affair with Meera and the murder of Sheriff Cates captivated the public. News outlets covered every moment, portraying the case as one of the most scandalous crimes in Asheville's recent history. The courtroom was packed daily with locals and reporters eager to catch a glimpse of the disgraced judge, once held in such high regard. During the trial, Gavin's defense team tried to argue that he had acted out of temporary insanity, that his emotions and obsession had driven him to a breaking point. But the jury saw through the defense's attempt to frame the crime as a moment of passion. Gavin's meticulous planning, the evidence of premeditation, and his cold confession painted a picture of a man whose obsession had overshadowed his morals. Gavin Blaine was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His life of authority and respect ended in disgrace, and he would spend the rest of his days behind bars, a stark reminder of how far he had fallen. The aftermath of the trial was a time of painful introspection for Meera. The affair, the murder, and the loss of her father weighed heavily on her, casting a long shadow over her future. In her search for escape from Asheville and her father's strict expectations, she had inadvertently become entangled in a nightmare that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She left Asheville shortly. Thank you for watching.